Hi everyone, thank you for joining the webinar today. Welcome to the November Team Studio and TLCC webinar. I'd like to introduce my co-hosts and today's speakers, Paul Delanebbia and Howard Greenberg from TLCC, who will be presenting access data from XPages with the relational controls. My name is Courtney. I'm the inbound marketing specialist at Team Studio and your co-host today. Before we start talking about today's topic, I'll be taking just a few moments to tell you who we are and what we do at Team Studio and go over some directions on how to use this WebEx webinar tool. I'll then be passing the controls to Howard Greenberg at TLCC so he can do the same, and then we'll dive right into today's topic. To get us started, I'd like to cover a few administrative points. To protect your privacy, the attendee list is not public, so you'll only see yourself as an attendee. All attendees are muted during this session, so you can participate by typing inside the chat window and Q&A panel on the WebEx ribbon on your screen. Use the chat window if you have a general question or comment, and the Q&A panel for your questions to the speakers. We're doing Q&A at the end of the session, but you're welcome to ask your question at any point in the Q&A panel, and we'll get to it once the formal presentation has concluded. This session is being recorded, and the link will be sent to you in a follow-up email in a few days. So a little bit about Team Studio. We may have assisted you in the past with application development. We've been delivering innovative developer tools and productivity tools to the Notes and Domino community since 1996, where we specialized in source code control, version management, and source code management. And we moved into the mobile application arena in 2010 with Unplugged. Unplugged gives you the ability to extend your IBM Notes apps out to mobile devices. The unique thing about Unplugged is that it leverages the powerful technology of XPages and provides a native app experience for the user. And these apps have the capability to function when offline. On May 2nd, we released Unplugged 3.1. This version brings Android up to speed with the improvements we made for iOS users in Unplugged 3.0. And it also offers improvements for iOS users. With Unplugged 3.1, apps run twice as fast, and development of apps is easier than ever for both Android and iOS. We're very proud to have been the recipient of 2 IBM Collaboration Solutions Awards for Unplugged in 2013 and 2014. In January of this year at the Connect conference, IBM awarded Unplugged with the Best of Show and CTO award, and at IBM Partner World in February, IBM recognized the Unplugged platform as a finalist for a Beacon Award. This product is available on the major mobile platforms, including BlackBerry, Android, and iOS. In addition to Unplugged as a platform, we also provide off-the-shelf templates like Team Studio Continuity for mobile business continuity, OneView for mobile approvals requests, and Customer View for mobile CRM. We'd be happy to arrange a demo to show you how these tools work. Just contact me during this webinar or contact us directly from our website or by phone. Lastly, if you'd like to web enable or mobilize your Notes applications, we'll do it for you through our modernization service. Now through December 15th, sign up to learn about our modernization services, and you'll be automatically entered to win an iPhone 6. Just click on the banner on the Team Studio homepage. And so with that, I'd like to pass the presentation over to Howard so he can talk a little bit about TLCC, and then we'll just dive right into today's topic. Over to you.
Thanks, Courtney, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Let me just get my screen sharing going. Let's see. Okay, hopefully you're starting to see my screen. You can confirm that, Courtney.
Yes, it's loading, but
slowly.
Yes, there it is.
Okay, very good. Well, my name is Howard Greenberg, and along with my partner, Paul Delanebbia. Paul, you want to say hello? Or maybe not. I know Paul
was there. He's muted.
Yeah, Paul was recovering from a system crash right before the webinar, so he might just be getting started.
I'm back.
You're back.
Hello,
You're recovered.
everyone. Yes, I'm here and recovered. Good morning. Good day, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Paul. A little bit about TLCC. Most of you probably know us. We've been around since 1997 doing self-paced courses for Notes and Domino for developers, admins, and users. We've been doing XPages training since the early beta days. And of course, we have our favorite, or I should say our most popular course, our free demo courses, including one that's an introduction to XPages. So if anyone's on the call today and really hasn't gotten started yet with XPages, it's a great 2-3 hour course. You can figure out what we're going to be talking about, not about the relational controls, but just an introduction to XPages. We also offer mentoring, so we've helped a number of our customers kind of go beyond the courses and apply what they've learned in the courses to their actual applications, as well as help them with some special projects and things that they were having problems on. And we also have done and can do instructor-led classes where we go to out to a customer's location and put on a class, either XPages or development or admin for Notes and Domino, or we can do that virtually as well. And finally, we also do development and consulting. Not only can we modernize your Notes apps to XPages, we've also helped customers with taking over their admin responsibilities and supporting their existing apps. A recent project we did, we brought a customer up to 9.0 from 6.5 and kind of fixed a number of issues in their 6.5 Domino web app. I kind of stuck a slide in this morning because as in the Notes Domino world, we have an important interim fix came out today. No, I have nothing against Poodles, but if you have a Domino server that is accessible to the public, in other words, it's outside the firewall, you need to get this fix because this fixes a well-known issue out there with SSL certificates called the Poodle attack. As well as this fix also will enable the mobile controls on iOS 8 devices. There's a number of other things in there too. You can now get a SHA-2 SSL certificate. And so there's interim fixes for 8.5, 9.0, and 9.01. So I put some links up there. You can go learn more about this Poodle attack and fix and the SHA-2 support, as well as the 9.01 interim fix that has all these, security fixes as well as the mobile controls fix. I believe Rob was going to put the links in the chat in the WebEx, and you'll also get these slides that have these links as well. Okay, a little bit about our next webinar. We have Mike McGarrell and I'm trying to think of a mind block on the other person. It's going to be presenting tips for building your first XPages Java application. And the good news here, in addition to the fact that we have an excellent webinar lined up, is that we will be going to GoToWebinar. So a number of you have requested that. GoToWebinar has support for iPads and iPhones, which some of you are looking forward to. And so one thing I do urge you, if you are going to attend the December webinar, and you may want to, when you get the email after you sign up, there is a link to set up and test your system, make sure everything's working with GoToWebinar prior to the day of the actual webinar. So the link for that is on the slide. Also, we have all the previous webinars recorded. The slides are available, and that's available on the same page. Okay, asking questions. We're going to have our Q&A at the end, but as we go through the webinar today, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the WebEx interface. You will see a Q&A pane. You can ask your question. I put it in blue, ask your question here. Make sure you select all panelists for who you're asking your question to, and we will answer your question verbally at the end of the webinar. So, but please go ahead and ask your questions as you think of them as Paul and I are going through the material today. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the agenda, but first Paul's going to take over and go through what are the relational controls, the system requirements, and how to enable a database to use the relational controls. Then I'm going to take over and talk about how we can actually access data using the relational controls, and Paul will finish up with a couple topics on that as well, and then we'll have our Q&A. So Paul, we'll transfer control over to you. Let's see. Courtney, if you could do that. Oh, wait a minute, I can do it now. Oh, looks like, Paul, you have controls.
Okay. And let me see if I can share my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and I'm showing a slide which summarizes the relational controls that are provided and available by installing the OpenNTF extension library. So this support is not like text. There's no syncing of Domino data and your relational data. The relational support allows for direct access to any relational database provided there's a JDBC driver and it's available and installed. There's two data sources, the JDBCQuery data source, which is a read-only data source, and the JDBC row set, which is a read-write relational data source. There's several JDBC add functions like at JDBC DB column to return a column of values from a table, and at JDBC execute query to execute an SQL query and return a result set for that query. There's also a new REST service type to display relational data in a Dojo data grid, and there's two Java helper classes to write Java code and to access and operate on relational data. Finally, there's a JDBC connection manager control, and that can be optionally added to an XPage to manage multiple connections and also to specify the transaction isolation level. The first requirement to set up your systems to take advantage of the relational controls is to install the OpenNTF extension library for your release of Domino. Now, for 8.5.3, that is not the Update Pack 1. Update Pack 1 included the extension lib, but not extension lib X, or the experimental extension library where the JDBC support was first introduced. So for 8.5.3, you're going to want to go to the OpenNTF extension library project, and you're going to want to get maybe the April 4th version of the extension library and install that. If you're running 9.0, you'd want to get the latest version for that. And this chart is actually a little dated, but for 9.0.1, you certainly want to get the release 7 version of the extension library for 9.0.1, the June 27th or later version. And there's, I think, a couple of versions later than June 27th as well. But you want that version because that has a number of improvements, a number of fixins to the relational support. It includes a wizard to create a JDBC driver plugin, and also the support for the relational support was moved out of the experimental library, extension lib X, and into the mainstream extension library. So you want that support as well. So certainly want to get the release 7 version or later. The next requirement is to install the JDBC driver for your relational database. The first two approaches to doing that are really not recommended by IBM. You can copy the drivers directly to your server in the JVM Live extension directory or EXT directory. You can copy the driver directly into the NSF, but then it would be limited to that application. So the recommended approach is to create a plugin to install the JDBC driver. And you can do that 3 ways. One is from scratch, and I would recommend the extension library book for the procedure on creating a plugin from scratch. Or much easier is to use the XPages JDBC driver wrap-in project, and that's a live link you'll get with the slides. But that's available from OpenNTF and a lot easier way to create your JDBC driver plugin. And easier still, if you are running 9.0.1 and you have installed the release 7 or later version of the extension library, you can simply use the wizard. So from the menu, you can select Tools, JDBC Driver Plugin Wizard, and you can specify your type of database, and you can specify the class or jar files for the driver. And at the end there, or at the bottom here, you can choose to create the full update site if you don't already have one for your servers, or you can simply choose to create the plugin only and then import that into your update site. Now, this is an optional but certainly a recommended step, and that is to install the XPages RDBMS enablement project. And this has a sample database, and it also includes the Derby database. And the sample database is on the sample XPages that use the relational support and provide some samples, use a local Derby database and driver. And also, our course and the demonstrations that we're going to do today will also be using the local Derby, I'll try that again, the local Derby database, or Apache Derby database, and the driver for that as well. Now, the next step to enable a specific NSF application to use relational database or use relational data is to first create a connection file, a .jdbc connection file in the web content WebINF JDBC folder for the application. So that's an XML file. It's going to start with a JDBC and end with a /JDBC tag. The driver tags, in between the driver tags, you're going to specify the driver to use. The URL, in between the URL tags, you'll specify the database to access, and you can also pass the credentials between the user and password tags. The next step is to, within the same database, enable the COM IBM XSP extension relational library. Okay, so you enable that in the XSP properties, and on the page generation tab, once you've installed the OpenNTF extension library, release 7 or later for 9.0.1, you'll just check off that option for the COM IBM XSP extension library relational library. For prior releases of the extension library, if you're running 8.5.3 or 9.0, you're going to choose the COM IBM XSP extension lib X library. Here's an example of a JDBC connection file for a DB2 database, and we can see between the driver tags the DB2 driver that's being used. This is to the sample DB database on DB2 server abc.com using port 50000. Okay, let's see this in Designer. And what I have here is a workspace with a number of databases from our XPages 2 course, and we deliver the demonstrations and activities in this relational data database. Now, this doesn't have any data. If I take a look at the views and the All Docs view, there we see that there are no documents within here. So the first requirement is to, in the Package Explorer, access that data, or that database, that project, and in the Web Content WebINF JDBC folder, you can create your connections or your connection files to, in this case, a Derby database, okay, the Big Oak Derby database. And this is an example of a connection file or a JDBC connection file to a DB2 database. Okay, so between the driver tags, specify the driver to use, and then specify between the URL tags, the database, and the server and port location. and you can pass the credentials between the user and password tags. Okay, so we're going to be using this Derby1 Big Oak database, and to specify that, and Howard will show you when he's connecting to this database, all you need to do once you've set up your connection file is specify Derby1 as your connection file to access that Big Oak set of databases. Now, the second requirement within the application is in the XSP properties. So here in the XSP properties, on the page generation tab, we just want to check off this one here, COM IBM XSP Extension Live Relational Library. Okay, and again, for prior to the release 7 version of the extension library for 901, you'd actually be checking off this extension LiveX library. Okay, so I'm all set up for that. And last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create this local Derby database. So using this particular X page, again from our course, I can test the connection. So that's testing the connection to that using that Derby1 connection file, and seems that I can connect to the database. And Howard created a class using those two Java helper classes that were provided in the relation support. He created a class to actually create the Big Oak tables from some Domino data that we have in our customers application. So there are 2 tables that were created. The customers table, and I see the kind of information, you know, there's an ID, there's a customer column, contact address, city, and so on. And the other table here is the regions table, and that only has 4 records in it for the East, North, South, and West region, and showing the sales rep and the quota for those various regions. And we can take a look at the metadata for these tables as well, so that I can see that, you know, the ID column or field is an integer, region is a variable character, quota, pardon me, quota is a double. Okay, so Howard's going to be using these databases, and I'm going to pass control over to Howard. Although, Courtney, if you can assist.
Yeah, they hide the interface, Paul. It's at the top of the screen.
I think I see it now.
Howard, you should have presentation rights now.
Okay, thanks. Let me share my monitor. And hopefully you're seeing my slide.
Yeah, we're seeing that, Howard.
Okay, good. All right. So now that we know how to set up the relational data and get everything going, how are we actually going to access the data? Well, first of all, there's 2 new data sources. So, you know, you're probably familiar with the Domino document data source and the Domino view data source. There's 2 new ones, JDBCQuery and JDBC row set. The JDBCQuery is what you're going to want to use for large amounts of data that are read-only. And the JDB row set you'll use when you want to read and write data. This isn't the only way you can use to write data, but one of the ways. And this will be cached in memory. So you obviously don't want to use this with thousands and thousands of records. You want to somehow subset your data when you're actually going to be doing reads and writes. And these data sources you can use with all your traditional XPages controls, like the view, the data view, the repeat, and the data table. There's also some new @ functions that we'll go over, a new REST service that Paul will show you that you can use with like the Dojo data grid or anything else that'll take a REST type data. And then as Paul mentioned, once you have this connection, you can use that connection to use any standard, you know, Java code that works with relational databases, you know, the JDBC, you know, various classes. And there are some helper classes that IBM has provided in the extension library, which you can see examples of in the demo database that you can download from OpenNTF. I don't know if Paul mentioned that, but in the on OpenNTF, there's a demo database it's not part of the extension library. It's a separate project. And that has some examples of using these helper classes, or you can look in the extension library book or look at the source code for these two classes. So let's get into the data sources first. So when you go to your data tab on the next page and go to add a data source, there'll be two new ones that are outlined here in blue. And then you can use those just like, you add those to your page and then set up some properties. So the first one we'll talk about is the JDBCQuery. And this is what you're going to want to use for read-only access, especially when you have large amounts of data. And the first thing you're going to do is set up the connection name property. And that's the Derby1 file in the example Paul did. You don't need to say .jdbc on the end, just Derby1. And then we have to specify what data we want to retrieve. So the data we want to retrieve, we can specify by using either a SQL table, where we give it a table name. So in the example database that Paul was showing you, we could say customers. That was the customers table. And now return all the data in the customers table. We can write a SQL query, or we can access SQL that's stored in a file. And that file you could put in the web INF folder in your Domino database. Obviously, you're only going to want to use one of these, but, have the ability to use all three when you set it up. So the SQL table will override the SQL query, and the SQL query will override the SQL file. There's a little bit order of precedence if you did use more than one. There's also a property called calculate count. This will enable the control or the data source to figure out how much data is there. If you're using something like a view control, it has a pager, and so you want the number of pages that are shown in the pager to be correct. So you set this calculate count to true, and it will go figure out how much data is there so the number of pages is correct. And so here's a picture of the data source. We'll go through this in a second. You got the calculate count I just mentioned. The connection name, here's where we put that Derby1. And then here's the three parameters I mentioned that we use to specify what data we want to return. Okay, so let's first try this out with a view panel. Here's the procedure to do it. I'm not going to go through these steps. They'll be on the slides, but I'm going to walk through these on the next slide. So here, when we're all done, it's just going to create a view panel. It's not a special control. It's the same view panel that we're used to. Okay, so let me go, let's try this out and create a something with a view control. And so I'll create a new X page so you know there's nothing magic going on. It's all we're going to do is drag a view control over to our X page. And then we get this dialog here that says, show data from. Normally you pick Domino view. There's no option here for the relational data sources, so we'll say select data source later. And it puts our view control on the page. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is go over to the properties, and it's always good when you're working with the view type controls to set up a var variable. Let me do that right now before I forget, because this is how we can access each row in the view control. So we'll just set that up right away before I forget. And we'll go to my data tab. Right now I don't have a data source selected for this view control. And notice I have my two new data sources listed here, and I'll choose the JDBCQuery. Okay, then we want to put in the connection name. So we put in that Derby1, that file that Paul set up. That's defining what database we're going to, the username, the password, all that good stuff. And then we'll go down to the SQL table property, and we want to display everything in the customers table. Last but not least, because I do have pagers on my view control, I want to calculate count set to true so that it appears correctly. Okay, now we go to the view columns itself. So we have to go to the all properties for the view column, And for the column name, my first column in that customers table is called customer, has the name of the customer. And I'll also set some text in my view column header so that displays the customer name, just so that the users know what kind of data we're looking at. And that should be it. So I should then be able to go preview this. And it will get all my customers, and it has my pager set up showing all my customers that are there. So that's that's basically it. We access relational data right from our XPages. So obviously we have some more data in that customers table. Let's go get another column. So we'll add it in a column. I'm right-clicking on the existing column and choosing append column. And I'll go to the view column header, and this time we're going to get the address. So I'll just put in address here, and then I'll go to the view column itself. I could, again, put in the column name and just type in address, which is the name of the column in my relational data, but I'll do it a different way here. I'm going to go to the value property and go to the compute value, and I'm going to use the expression language. And since my var I set up for the view was row entry, I can say row entry.address, and that will use the expression language to pull in the address from that customers table. And I'll preview this. Now we got our address there. Okay, so let's keep going. And let's add another column. So append column. This time what I want to do is append the city and the state in one column. So in my relational data, I have a column for the city and a column for the state, and I want to have those together separated by a comma. So I'll go over to the value property for my new column in my view control. This time I'm going to use the custom language. Custom language lets you combine the expression language and some static text, so I can just go put in, again, I'll use that row entry variable, and we want to get the city, and then we want to have a comma and a space, so I'll put those in there, and then we want to get the state. So that's my custom expression. Let's set up the column header, just so we know what we're looking at, city and state. And I'll go back to my browser and refresh that. And now we have our city and state. Okay, so we're accessing, all that relational data. Let's go back and let's kind of fine tune this a little. Let's go back to the view control itself and to the data section. And in the data section, let's say we want to sort my data. Right now it's sorted by the customer. That was the default in our table. But let's say we want to sort by the state column. And then within the state column, we want to sort by the city. I'll put in the default order by property, and I can change the ordering of my view. And I'll refresh that, and you see now we're sorted by the state. And within each state, we sort by the city. Okay, so that's the sorting. And let's say we want to let the user click, in Domino, we have the ability, to click on the view column header and let the user change the sorting. We can do the same thing here. We can go to the view column header properties, turn on the sortable, set that to true, and go to try that out. And now notice that my customer name column has that little up and down arrow. I can click on that and resort based on the customer name. I can go ascending, descending, or go back to the default sort order. Okay, so that's the view panel. So that's, as you can see, that's pretty straightforward and not much more difficult than accessing a Domino view. Let's look at some other controls we can use with our relational data. So we can also use the repeat, the data table, and the data view. And we're going to access our data in pretty much the same way that we did with the view panel. We can use either the expression language, the custom that I showed you, or we could use Server Side JavaScript, which basically is Java under the covers. What's going to happen is that our row entry that I used in that previous example, that was the var variable that I set up for the view panel. In your repeats, it's called collection name. I think the data table is the same name. But it's the same thing. It's what we use to access the individual rows in our control. So to access, as we're repeating through a set of relational data to access each row, we use that var variable. Let's say it's called row entry. And then I can use get column value to get the value for that particular row for that column. And what that is it's actually the Java class's JDBC data block accessor. And that has a get column value method that we're going to use to get the actual data if we were using server-side JavaScript. So if you wanted to use the value and then do some computation or some other lookup or something else in server-side JavaScript, you can do that. If that's all you're doing is displaying the data, use the expression language or the custom because it works much quicker than using the server-side JavaScript. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. Okay, so on this X page here, one of our examples from our course, we have a data table. Before we look at that, let's look at the X page itself on the data tab. I have my JDBCQuery data source. The data source is named JDBCQuery1. And we're going to the customers table, and the calculate count is set to true. And in our data table, when I look at the data table properties, you see that I set up a collection name called row entry. So that's like that var variable in the view panel. We also bound this data table to our data source, JDBCQuery1. And then within our data table in the row that repeats, we have two computed fields in two different columns. And these use the expression language to get the customer column. And then you see how I'm using that collection name variable row entry. If we look at this in the source, you see that it's using the standard expression language syntax. And then for the other computed field, it's the same thing, except here we're getting the city value. Okay, then I have a repeat here. The repeat has the same data source. Here our collection name is called row var. And we have one computed field that's using the custom language, and it's getting using that row var variable and getting the customer name, and then has some static text that says in, and then the city name. Let's go preview that. So you see we have our data table, our pagers are set up and they work. And it shows the customer and the city for the data table, and the repeat has the customer and the word in, and then the city. Okay, so that's using the different controls. So it really works the same as your Domino view data. There really isn't much difference. The real power in any relational database engine is in the SQL language, which we could probably have a webinar for a week going over all the stuff you can do with SQL. But just kind of, you know, a lot of you and have worked with relational data and might be somewhat familiar with SQL. For those of you who are not, probably the most important SQL command you want to use is the select keyword. So as I said before, we can specify, and in the examples I gave before, we use the SQL table. We were going to the customers table, but we can also write the SQL language to create a query. And when we're doing SQL queries, we're typically going to use the select keyword. And so we say select, that's the keyword. Asterisk means select all the columns from the table that we're going to specify. So from is the keyword, customers is our database table. So if we just look at select asterisk from customers, that's exactly the same as specifying the SQL table. Because we're going to get all the columns from the customers table. But let's say we want to narrow that down. We only want to get the customers who are in the East region. So now we can use the where keyword in SQL to subset our data, to do a query. So here we're going to say where the region column is like, and like is used for string pattern matching. And in SQL, we put our string literals, our constants in single quotes. So this is going to return all the customers in the East region. Okay, so that's kind of a little SQL basics there. Now, of course, when we're developing an XPage, we're going to probably want to have an XPage where, in this case, they can select the region. You know, in this case, if you remember, the data or sample data has the east, west, north, and south for region. They want the user to be able to select what region that they want to display and just show the customers from that region. So we can, of course, we can build the SQL query in our XPages property, you know, the SQL query property. We can build that string up. In other words, we can have select star from customers or region like in the single quote in our string, combine that with whatever the user selected to specify the region, you know, a combo box control, you know, get that value, what they selected, and we can build up our query, SQL query that way. But that's not really the best way to go, because there's something called a SQL injection attack that people out on the web could stick some SQL you're not expecting and access data that you weren't expecting them to. So that's called SQL injection attacks. If you do a Google search, you kind of read more about that. So what you want to do is, instead of building up the SQL query string, you want to replace what's going to be a variable with a question mark. And that's called a SQL parameter. So now our SQL is going to say select star from customers where region like question mark. And then what we're going to do is pass it some SQL parameters. And we can here, we can have as many as we want. The SQL parameters are going to be a list, and wherever a question mark is found, it will get the next parameter in the list. So you want to use the SQL parameter wherever you're going to have a SQL query that has something that's going to be a variable. And we can see an example of that here, that I have my SQL query, and we have our SQL parameters, and right now we just have one because there's only one question mark. And the value, this value that's getting computed, will get inserted in place of the question mark. Okay, and the SQL engine knows that, hey, that should be a string, and you know that's what, and it applies basically some security checking so they can't have those SQL injection attacks. Let's see, let's go back and look at that in our XPage. Okay, so on this XPage, we're going to let the user select a region. So we got a combo box, and the values are hard-coded to be east, west, north, and south, and I also have an all option. And when the user selects the all option, the value that's getting saved is just going to be an empty string. And we're going to use that to allow the user to reset their data to show all of the customers, not just the ones in a certain region. This combo box is bound to a view scope variable called region. So when the user selects a region, it's going to set this view scope variable called region, and we can then access whatever choice the user made. So let's look at our view control here and look at the data. So in the data source for this view control, expand that. And you see I have my SQL query here. So we're saying select star from customers or region like question mark. So wherever you have the question mark in our where statement of our SQL, that's going to be a parameter. So we have our SQL parameters. I've already set up one that's going to return the, first it looks at the viewScope.region. Remember that's the data that that combo box was bound to. And if you haven't seen this before, the exclamation point in front of our data is going to test it. And so if this viewScope.region is good data, in other words, it's not null and it's not empty, we're going to return whatever is in that value. Otherwise, we return a percentage sign. The percentage sign in SQL is a wildcard. So that's going to return everything. So if it sees that the data in our viewScope.region variable is not is null or it's empty, it'll just return a wildcard to show all the data. So we'll go preview this. So now it's showing all the data. Got 4 pages of data. If I select just the north region, nope, didn't work. Select just the east region, then it shows all my customers in the east, and it's filtering based on that viewScope variable and that SQL statement that I had. Okay, a little more about SQL. So I'm sure everyone on the call has probably been doing notes development for quite a while, and when you're working with views, the one thing you probably really wish you could do is have a notes view that then looked up a value in another notes view somehow, or join 2 views together. Well, with SQL, that's a piece of cake. They do that all the time in the SQL world, and that's called a join. So we just have to add some things to our SQL statement. So let's go over, first let's go through the example of what we want to do. So we have our customers table that has all our customer information that you've seen so far. And then also Paul showed a regions table, a small little table that has our regions, east, north, south, and west, and each region has a sales rep assigned to it and a quota. So what we want to do is have a view control that not only shows the region, but we want to see the actual sales rep's name. So we want to join these 2 tables together. So what we're going to do is, again, use the select keyword. And instead of saying asterisk, we're actually going to name what columns we want to pull in. So customers.customer will get the customer column from the customers table. The customers.contact will get the contact column from the customers table, and then the address, city, and state, and region, and so forth. But then we also want to get the sales rep column from the regions table, this column here. But we want to get that where what we want to do is join the customers table with the regions table. So inner join is the SQL keyword. And we want to do that where the on is the keyword, where the customers.region is equal to regions.region. So where this say this is east, we want to go to the east and get the join this table together, these 2 tables, and then we're going to just get the sales rep column from that sales rep columns here, or the sales rep value, I should say. What we're doing is an inner join. An inner join is going to return all the rows in common. You'll also see in the SQL world an outer join, which is a union. But here we want to get the rows in common. All right, so let's go look at that in the next page. It's really pretty simple because it's all we're doing is putting in for our view control in our data. We're going to have a SQL query property. And in that, we're going to have that SQL I went over. And then when I preview this, you see that now we have the sales rep column. And as I page through it, you see that it's the sales rep, for each region. So that's kind of showing you a little bit of the power of SQL. You can really do a lot, and we're actually going to, we talked about the app functions, we'll go through another way we can accomplish the same result, not necessarily using SQL, but just doing kind of more of a query in that particular column. So that's what I'm talking about next is some of the new app functions. First one is the JDBC. All of these new app functions start with JDBC. So after you install the extension library, you'll see these in the various type ahead capability. If you just type @JDBC, it will show you these new app functions. The JDBC get connection returns a java.sql.connection object, so you can then work with that with Java code. Here's one that Notes developers are gonna love. It's basically a DB column, but it goes to relational data instead of your Notes data. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. The first way is 3 parameters. You give it the connection name, which can be that Derby1 example we had, or it can be a connection object that we just talked about using that @JDBC get connection. Then you give it a table name, so the table you want to go to, and the column in that table you want to return. And it will return that whole column of data from that table. It's going to return it as an array. So then you can pass that to a combo box, you can, loop through it, you can do whatever you want. Same with, a standard @DB column. The other thing we can do is add a 4th parameter to kind of subset the data down a little bit. Let's say you only want to get the customers in the East region, so you can say region like East, only do that. Or you can add a 5th parameter to order your data. So you can have a column name here that will specify the ordering of the return data. And finally, you have a parameter with parameters. And these would be, again, what you get substituted in the where clause, this 4th parameter, when you're using some SQL query to subset the data. If you used a question mark, you would have an array value here for this last parameter that has the values that get substituted in for those question marks that were in your SQL. So here's an example at the bottom of our page. Let's just look at an example on a working X page. A couple examples here. Actually, we have a combo box. We want to get all the regions from the regions table. So we have that computed. In this case, we are using the JDBC get connection to get a connection object called con, and we pass that as the 1st parameter. The 2nd parameter is the table name. The 3rd parameter is the column we want to get, in this case, the name of the region. And then we just return that value. The next example, there's actually 2, but they kind of work together. The user is going to go and select a state. So we first want to show them all the states that are in our customers table. So this is our customers table. This is the state column that we want to return. We want to get all the states. So we say state like single quote, %, single quote, to be a wildcard. The reason we have to put the wildcard in there is because we also wanted to use this next parameter to specify the ordering. So we're going to order the data that gets returned by the state. Now, we have more than one customer in a state, so we use the @unique just to, avoid the duplicates. Once the user selects a state, we're going to use that value in this next combo box, and what we want to show is all the customers in that selected state. So the state that they selected is going to be in our state variable, and that state variable we're going to use to build an array called params, and we're going to pass that array here. The reason why we have that array is because we have, again, that question mark. So whatever state the user selected will get substituted in for the question mark. So let's try this out. So the first one, it just shows our regions. So you see we have our regions there. The next one, we pick a state. and it just shows the customers in that state. So that's that one. Close that. Forget. Okay. Let's look at another add function. Here's the JDBC execute query. This is going to be, in terms of parameters, it's pretty simple. You just give it a connection name and a string that is a SQL query, and it's going to return the data as a java.sql.result set. So what is that? If you never worked with Java, don't be scared. That's all that is going to be a class that lets you iterate through the data. And there's not too much you need to know on that. You can basically, if you look at the code after, here's our query, select sales rep for regions where region like question mark. So assume the region is a column in our view, and so for that individual row, we want to pass the region to the query, and then that returns a variable called res. And then we say, have a little loop while res.next. Res.next will be true as long as there's data to get. And this is going to iterate through our data, our java.sql.result set. And then as we're iterating through it, we can say get string to get the sales rep column. And we're going to append all the sales reps that we're going to get with a question and a space. So we're going to loop through all the return data until there's no more data, and we're going to get the sales rep column and append those together in one big long string separated by commas. Okay, we have a similar example here. So here's another way to get the sales rep in our view control. So we have all these, our view, oops. Okay, in our view, we're just getting the customers table. And so that's what we use for the first so many columns of this view. We're just going to the customers table. But if you remember the sales rep column, that doesn't exist in the customers table. So, but here we computed the value of this column, and we're using that JDBC execute query to select the sales rep from the regions table. And we're using that row entry dot region to say, get me the region for that particular row and pass that into our query to get the sales rep. Then when we get that return data, the RES, we're going to loop through it. And it's really only going to go through the loop once, because if you remember our data, we only have one sales rep per region. So we don't worry about building up a string. We just use the res.getString to get the sales rep value and return that. So you see then it gets the sales rep. Let me go to a page that's not all west. It gets the sales rep for each region. So it's just another way to kind of do a lookup in your view. One thing they don't have is at JDBC DB lookup. So this is kind of a way to do a DB lookup with your relational data. Okay, JDBC delete will let you delete rows from your table. So you have pass it a connection name, you give it a table, and then you tell it what rows you want to delete. So you have some sort of SQL. You probably, in this case, maybe want to pass the customer name. So in this case, we're getting a component of some sort that the user selected or typed in the name of a customer. And we have our SQL string, customer equal question mark. And we have our JDBC delete, specifying the name of the table. Here's our SQL string that we specified here. And here's the actual name of the customer we want to delete is in the SEL. This will return the number of records deleted. Okay. Let's look at how we did insert data. We use the JDBC insert. Again, you pass it the connection and the table name, and then we have the values. So this is going to insert a new row in our data. So what we can do is pass it an array with all the columns for that new row. Or we can have a name value pair where you could say customer equals quote John Smith quote. And you can have an array of those name value pairs. You can have a Java hash map or a JSON object. So you build up these values with one of those 4 data types and pass that as the third parameter to define what data you're creating. Okay, let's look at that real quick. So we have a demonstration here. Let's first look at the deleting capability. So here we have a combo box that has the names of our customers. When the user selects a customer and clicks the button, we run some code. We do the @JDBC delete to go to the customers table, and we're going to delete whatever customer is equal to question mark, which we passed in as our SQL statement. And finally, we have our parameters, which will be the name of the customer we want to delete. And again, this returns the number of records deleted. If we want to create a new customer, we have a button here, Create New Customer. This doesn't do much. It just shows a dialog, which is at the bottom of the page here. So we have a dialog control, and we have all the fields that would let the user type in the values for the new customer. Then we have 2 buttons to save the data. They do the same thing, just work different ways. In the code for that Save button, we're going to get all our data the user entered in the dialog and put those in variables. And in this case, we're building a JSON object. So we create, these are all our column names here, customer, contact, address, city, state, zip, and so forth. And then at the end, we have our JDB insert. This is the table we want to insert the data into. This is the new row data that we're going to create as a JSON object. When we're done, we hide that dialog and refresh that panel that has the view control. The Java hash map way of doing it is exactly the same way, except we're creating a Java hash map and using the put method to put the data in the Java hash map that we pass to our record. So we can try that out. So first, let me create a new record. Okay, so there's our new record. I'll use one of these save buttons, and it created my new record. It's inserted it at the end. So there's my new row of data. And then if I want to delete that, I can see that new customer there, and I can just say delete, and it says the number of records deleted is 1, and the record's gone. So those are the insert and delete app functions. Then there's a update app function. Again, our values, this is going to update some rows. If we don't have the where clause here, it's going to update every row in your table. That may be what you want, may not. Or we can have the where clause to, again, specify, only delete Big Al's golf. Not delete, but only update Big Al's golf. The values will be the values that we want to change. So we only have to list what we want to change as long as we're doing the name value pair, the Java hash map, or the JSON object. If you use just an array of just values, it has to have all of the columns that would be in the table. Okay, we'll look at that. 764. And so here we have our data. We select a customer to delete in this combo box. We put in a new contact. It's an edit box. We click the button, and it gets the customer we selected in the SEL variable, gets the new contact name that we typed in. It creates a JSON object. So here, it's only going to update the contact record for that new customer or new contact we typed in, and it's only going to update the customer we selected because this SQL here we're passing in and for the where clause as well as the parameter. So we'll try this out. And so if I want to update, let's say Arnold's Golf, and let's change the name to Andy Arnold instead of Howard Arnold. The first row, click on it, and you see the data is updated. And again, it returns the number of records that were updated. Okay, just wrapping up real quick, there's a control. You might have seen it in some of the demos that I had, JDBC Connection Manager. This is what you're going to want to use when you have multiple controls on your page that are using the same connection or multiple data sources that use the same connection. This is also something you can use when you're reading and writing data to, you can set the transaction isolation level. I got a reference there in the extension library book, or speak to your database admin and they'll give you a whole big thing about the transaction isolation. It helps define when there's a lot of reads and writes going on. So the JDBC Connection Manager you're going to want to use when another option would be when you have multiple transactions that you want to commit at the same time. In other words, the user makes a number of changes in the table and then they click the Save button. Paul will show an example of that. To use the JDBC Connection Manager, you drag it over to the page from Domino Designer, set up the connection name. It has an ID automatically assigned. And then in your data sources, instead of specifying the connection name, you just specify the connection manager instead. And it will, all the controls or all the data sources will go to that same connection manager, which will manage your connections. Okay, so next up will be Paul. And Paul, let me see if I can switch over to you.
Okay.
I guess Courtney did that. Thanks, Courtney.
And are you seeing Designer?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. I'm going to focus on the other data source, the JDBC row set data source. So up until now, in all of Howard's demonstrations, he's been using the JDBCQuery data source, which is a read-only data source. The JDBC row set data source is a read-write data source, and the entire row set is cached in memory, and all of the changes are cached in memory until they're finally committed using the accept changes method of that particular class for that type of row set data source. So there's a new row method in the class to create a new record, and again, that's going to be created in memory. There's a get row method if you want to modify an existing row within the result set, and a save row to save those changes that you've made. There's also a delete row method in the class to delete a row from your result set, and all of that goes for null until you call the accept changes method to actually commit the changes to the database. So let's see an example of that. And it's on this demo X page 771, and I'm simply going to preview that. Let's just see how this works. So I'm going to delete a couple of rows, and nothing's happening here. I'm still seeing, Arnold's and Athens Golf and so on. And if I roll back the changes and not commit them, I continue to see those records within my result set. So let's do it a little differently. Let me edit Arnold's Golf, and I'm just going to, let's say, corrupt the zip code for a couple of these, and I'll save those changes. And again, not saved to the database. This is just saved in memory until I actually commit those changes. I'm going to delete a couple of rows, anything that begins with C or D or F for Fox Run. So I'll delete a couple of those, and I'll also create a new record. Okay. And I'm going to save that. And I can see this Acme Golf. I can also see a different kind of color coding in my message here. For new records, I see it in kind of a light green here, commit to add this row. commit to save these changes in yellow, and in red, commit to delete this row. So if I do commit the changes and execute that accept changes method, that in fact happens. I don't see any C, D, or F records. I can see that a couple of these have been modified. And if I go to the very end of this result set, I can see the Acme Golf that was added at the end. So let's take a quick look at that in Designer. And there's a lot to this example, so I'm just going to give a very high-level overview of the way that data sources are set up for this particular example. So actually, first I'm going to jump over to the lesson in our course where we cover this. So this is our XPages 2 course, and Module 7 is on the relational database or relational data access that's available through the relational support. And there's a lesson on using the JDBC row set. So there's quite a lot to this, but we can see some of the methods in the JDBC row set accessor class, so get row and delete row and accept changes, new and save row, so some of those. And I just want to scroll down in the lesson. You can see there's quite a lot of detail here. But this basically describes the relationship of data sources for this example. So we have a main panel, and our JDBC row set is set up for the main panel. And then within that, we have a repeat to repeat column information, for every record within that JDBC row set that's been returned. And here's an image showing the relationship in Designer. So on our main panel, we have a data source called JDBC row set 1, which returns all of the records from our customers table. And then within that main panel, there is a repeat, and that's where we're repeating the field values for the customer name and contact and so on. And we're also repeating an in-place form to make changes to the customer contact and address and so on. So within that repeat 1, the variable to address each row within the row set I've called row var. And the index variable to address the index for each row is called row index. So let's take a look at that in Designer. And I'm going to minimize this and expand my outline. And on my main panel, I see a data source called JDBC row set 1. Okay, so it is a JDBC row set data source, one of those. Okay. And for the connection, it's using not a connection name to Derby1, instead it's using JDBC Connection Manager 1. So further up, there is a Connection Manager control, okay, that's pointing to the Derby1 connection file for my Big Oak tables. And the SQL query here is select customers, contact, address, and so on from the customers table. Okay. And that's one of the advantages of using the SQL query, which Howard pointed out, is that you can specify just the columns you're going to operate on. Okay, so JDBC row set, the data source representing all of the rows within that customers table, those specific columns for all of the rows. And then within that, we have a repeat. Okay, so let me select the repeat. And it's repeating around this table row where I can see the customer name and so on. So if I take a look at the binding for this repeat, what we're repeating over is JDBC row set 1. So we're going to repeat over the entire JDBC row set data source, okay, and all of the records. And to address each individual record or row, I have row var set up and row index to indicate the index position for that particular row. So what I can see for these various computed fields is rowvar.customer to return the customer name for that row, and rowvar.contact to return the contact for that row, and so on. If I take a look at the delete record link and look at its on-click event, I see this code, JDBC row set 1, and delete row, specifically the row index row. So for that particular row where I click the delete record, it's going to delete just that row. If I take a look at the edit record, okay, this is just opening up an in-place form. Okay? And that is, let me expand this a little further. Oh, didn't want to do that. Let's try that again. Okay, and my in-place form is here. And within my in-place form, we have another panel, and an object data source was set up for this particular panel. And to create the object, we're using the getRow method of the JDBC rowset class. So JDBC rowset 1 to reference the entire result set collection, and getting specifically just the row for that row index. Okay, that was set up in the repeat. There's a save object method, JDBC rowset 1, and using that save row method to save that particular row and whatever changes we've made. So there's a lot to this. I don't want to go into, really don't have the time to go into any more detail. I do want to show one more example. And that is the capability to display relational data in a Dojo data grid. So also in our XPages 2, we have a complete module on the Dojo data grid. For that, typically we're using Domino data sources, Domino views, specifying different Domino views to display in the grid. But you can also specify a relational data to display in a grid using the JDBCQuery JSON service type REST service. Okay, so let's see an example of that. And that's here in this demo XPage 781 example. And we see a REST service and a Dojo data grid. Let me just preview that to see what this looks like. And we see a Dojo data grid with its infinite scrolling capability. And I can simply click on these column headings to sort by state or city or address or contact or whatever. And we've got the grid capabilities to move columns around and all sorts of fun. Lots of things you can do. You can automatically resize your columns and so on. So let's take a look at how that's done. So here in my Dojo data grid, I can see in the all properties that its store component ID is REST service 1, and that's this REST service. And this REST service is of type JDBCQuery JSON service. So that's one of the types that you can add, pointing to our Derby1 connection file, so we can access the Big Oak tables. Content type is application JSON, and using this SQL query, select all from customers. So let me just recreate that. So I'm going to comment out that REST service. Okay, so Control-Shift-C just to comment that out, and I'm going to recreate that. So here on the data access panel within our controls palette, I can add a REST service. So we'll do that. And I'm going to put it inside this. Maybe not quite there. There we go. That's what we wanted, just in case there's something operating on that panel. So REST service 1, and that's the REST service that my Dojo data grid is pointing to. And the service type that I'm going to add is this type here, JDBCQuery JSON service. Okay, so I'm going to specify connection name of Derby1. And the SQL query, select all from customers. And the content type, you need to specify application JSON. And that's basically how you add a JDBCQuery JSON service for use in a Dojo data grid. And Howard, that's all I have to show here.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so we're going to come up to the Q&A time. But before we do that, I'd like to point out, I know Paul and I mentioned, there's a course that we have. It is our business here for courses, that is. The XPages 2 course that goes into, has a whole module on the relational data controls. It has a module on Dojo data grids. It also has a number of other topics it covers on XPages application architecture and performance and advanced working with custom controls. And basically, it's about 4 days worth of material that it'll take you to go through. It is self-paced, so you kind of go at your own pace wherever you are. And just for attendees, we do have a special deal. It's $300 off. So we'll have a link for that in the email we send you after the webinar, or it'll be on the slides. So it's something, if you're interested in learning more, you can check out. Plus, we'll have all the demos and details about everything we covered today. We will have, the slides, but we won't be releasing a demo database since all the demos are an integral part of our course. Okay, so for the Q&A, there is a Q&A panel that I pointed out before. If you can ask your questions there, we do have a number already. And there are a couple upcoming events. I'm not going to go through those, but you can see them on the screen, and these links will be on the slides that you can get if you want to get some more information. So, Paul, do you have some questions lined up?
I do not.
No. Oh, okay. Well, I have to get
I'm just scrolling through them right now.
Okay. I have to fight with the WebEx interface to find that again. It hides it every time you start presenting. So let's see. Where would that be? Oh, there it is.
Oh, I've got it.
Okay, I can take one off the top of my head that I remembered. Someone asked about prepared statements, and prepared statements are basically those question marks and parameters I was showing you before. So that is something that, yeah, it does support, and that's not a problem.
Okay, we've got a question from Nachikat. Like the FT search in a view panel, can we search relational data as well? And yes, you can, and that's your SQL query. So using that SQL query parameter, and Howard showed us several examples, and the keyword is select, and select all from customers where region equals question mark. So effectively searching against your relational data.
Okay, got a question from Martin. Is there any way to pass in the username and password in the JDBC config file, or they need to be hard-coded in the XML? That is not an XPage, so that I believe you do have to hard-code in those values.
Also from Martin, can we execute a stored procedure? Now there's the SQL file, and you can, so you've got the three options. You can specify for your data source SQL table, SQL file, or SQL query. So SQL file, you can specify within there the commands to execute a stored procedure. Now, I haven't done that, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. You want to confirm that, Howard?
I haven't done it yet either, Paul. There's a question on connection pooling. So connection pooling is an integral part of the relational controls. There is a complete section you can add to the JDBC file that has connection pooling parameters. In addition, the newest version of the relational controls in the 901 extension library support the Apache, I believe it's called the JDBCQuery connection pooling. So you can specify that type of connection pooling or the what they call simple connection pooling that has been in the relational controls from the beginning.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions related to updating the same record in a JDBC row set data source. So, you know, if someone deletes a record and someone else updated the same record, who wins? You can specify that when you add a connection manager control, and there are, I think, 4 or 5 choices in terms of the transaction isolation level. Using that, you can specify to keep both records or keep the last change and so on. So there are different options for that.
Okay, and then we had a question from David Weedy. How do you handle validation when working with the row set data? Well, the validation would be done just on the XPages controls. So whatever control you have that you're going to let the user type in information, update your data, you would just put your validation there, and then when the XPages is submitted, it will go through the validation that was on that control or controls. We have another question from Dwayne. I'll just grab this one real quick, Paul, since I showed it. Dwayne said you showed a column sortable for a view panel having a JDBC data source, but it only could be sorted in ascending order. Actually, the demo I showed, I sorted, first click was ascending, second click was descending, and the third click was taking it back to the default sort for the view panel. So that does work both ascending and descending.
This one we may need to take away unless you know this one, Howard. Question from Sebastian. Would like to know if it's possible to use the type ahead search feature using values from an Oracle table.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could just, in the, where you have the type ahead defined, you just, you could use your @JDBC DB column and go to your relational table to the column that you want to use for table type ahead and do that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good one.
And let's see, what else do we have? Richard asked a question, is there an advantage over using the relational tools over pure Java if you know how to do it? No, I mean, I think one advantage is the, some of the work is done for you. You have the connection pooling built in, you have, an easy non-Java way of accessing the data. But if you know Java and how to work with relational databases, that's probably a better way to go. But how much better or how would I quantify that? I don't think I can. So that kind of corresponds with Peter's had a comment. Is there any benchmarks on using JDBCQuery? And I haven't seen any performance data. So that would be something you'd have to try out on your own data and see how fast it is. It seems to be fairly quick from what I can see.
A question about where do I download the demo on SF? So the demonstrations that Howard and I showed today were from our XPages 2 course, which is a course that you buy from TLCC. But if you want to get started, there is the free XPages RDBMS enablement project that's available from OpenNTF. And that one has its own set of demonstrations. There's just no kind of documentation that goes with it, but certainly somewhere to start. You can kind of look through the code and get a lot of ideas on how to start from there.
Okay, and we had a question from Steve. What about readers and authors' names? Well, of course, your database engine doesn't know about your Domino readers and authors fields. So that's something that if you were somehow combining relational data, you'd have to kind of figure that out on your own because the back-end relational engine doesn't know what readers fields you might have set on a document, which It's not dealing with documents, it's just dealing with relational data. And also that kind of brings up a point that whatever username you use in your JDBC file, it has to be, one that has enough access to do whatever you're going to want to do on that application. So, you need to pick an admin ID or something, and then if there's any security you want to add, you add that at the XPage level.
All right, I think we're at time.
Yes. Okay, so I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We will send out a recording of this presentation as well as make the slides available. And remember, next month we have a new topic on getting started with Java on XPages. And don't forget that that will be on a GoToWebinar interface. So please test that software out before the day of the webinar. Because once the webinar starts, we really don't have the ability to support you with GoToWebinar questions. So please, make sure that you can not only, use GoToWebinar, but maybe you want to get the iPad app and give that a try. So everyone have a great rest of your day. And Courtney, do you have any final words?
I think you covered it, Howard, but thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next month on December 2nd.
Okay, thanks, Courtney, and take care.